that be. You think you can do that? Yeah, all right. This is also kirtan light. We're not using mridangas and kartals because you won't hear it otherwise. All right, let's do this together. You're the cause of all creation. You're the wonder that we see. Nothing can exist without you. Splendid spark in all that be. Now I will sing. Of lights you are the radiant sun. Of stars you are the moon. Of pure fires you are the mighty wind. Of seasons you are the spring. Everybody, you're the cause of all creation. You're the wonder that we see. Nothing can exist without you. Splendid spark in all that be. You're the soul in every body, inner guide and dearest friend. You are all-pervading beauty, gracious love that never ends. Everybody, you're the cause of all creation. You're the wonder that we see. Nothing can exist without you. Splendid rock and all that be. You're the perfect taste in water and the fragrance of the earth. You are poetry and music, cause of everlasting mirth. You're the cause of all creation. You're the wonder that we see. Nothing can exist without you. Splendid spark in all that be. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Everybody, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. How did you like that? Okay. I was really surprised when we started to sing this in Potomac because, like you, it's mostly Indian people. And I thought, wow, they're amazing that they like to sing it in English. I mean, we got the idea because there was a time when Lord Chaitanya instructed Narottam Das Thakur to sing in his own language. You know, the bhajans and stuff were not sung in Bengali in the beginning. And Lord Chaitanya instructed him to do that. And I always wondered when I saw Bengali people singing how much emotion they had, and I realized it was because they were singing in their own language. Makes a difference, right? So this is an experiment. So tonight I wanted just to share, in the interest of remembering Srila Prabhupada, I read this wonderful book, perhaps you know it, by a woman named Mulla Prakriti, a god sister of mine. And she has died. She has been dead maybe 10 years. So. But she lived in Vrindavan, and before she died, she went around to Brijbasis, and she interviewed them to see if they could share some of their memories of Prabhupada. And when I read the book, I realized, gosh, I've been in the movement almost 50 years. I haven't heard some of these stories. So I just would like to share some of them. Maybe you've heard some of them already from various books. But it's always wonderful to remember Srila Prabhupada. One of the first memories had to do with Prabhupada's godbrother, Sridhar Maharaj, who he had a very, very close relationship with. And while Srila Prabhupada was living in Calcutta, he was living near the Calcutta Saraswat Temple at Sita Kant Banerjee Lane. And he had two adjacent houses. Prabhupada had his family house, but adjacent to that, he also had his pharmaceutical business. Most of you probably know already that Prabhupada had a lab and he had his own products. They're kind of Ayurvedic. He was into naturopathy particularly. He didn't talk a lot about it, but you could tell from some of the treatments he gave the devotees how to make toothbrush and toothpaste and different things. So he donated the upstairs room above his chemical business for a small temple, even while he was living in his family. And he encouraged Sridhar Maharaj to come and preach. And they became very, very good friends, and they would invite many people from the local community to come for programs in his little preaching center upstairs. And Sridhar remembered how passionately, even in those days, Prabhupada, as a householder, in the midst of all his work and his family, how he was all the time busy writing letters to Indian leaders, on top of that, personal sadhana, and I believe that initiated disciples of Bhaktisiddhanta had to chant 64 rounds a day. He only asked us to chant a minimum of 16, but he was chanting on top of all of that 64 rounds, and I don't know how many hours. You can imagine how many hours that would take to write. So when we look at Prabhupada's life before he came to the West, we can see that it was a lifetime in preparation. It was a long journey. It's not like he went from one thing to the next and suddenly he appeared in the Western world. So one thing he recalled, Sridhar Maharaj recalled, oh, these are so beautiful, but they're so hot. They're so I'll give it back to you in a minute. So Sridhar Maharaj remembers he was not very inclined to preach, even though Bhaktisiddhanta encouraged everybody to preach. Sridhar Maharaj wasn't that enthusiastic. He was more of a scholar. And he remembers that Prabhupada one day urged him to go with him to tell Gandhi that he had to give Krishna consciousness to all the people. And I didn't know this until recently, that Prabhupada, I knew he was a follower of Gandhi, but I didn't realize how much involved he was in the Gandhi movement. And that's very interesting to me, that he was a follower of Gandhi, and then he wanted to tell Gandhi when he met Bhaktisiddhanta that he needed to give that up, but he unfortunately died before he was able to make contact. So Sridhar is remembering that one night, between 1 and 2 in the morning, he gets a knock at the door. And Srila Prabhupada is saying to him, I had a dream of my Guru Maharaj, and he's telling me I need to leave family life. And Prabhupada was never really interested to become a sannyasi. He was very, very, he was very content in married life in the sense that he had his space, he could do his sadhana, he was able to do preaching, and he was able to engage his family members in some way. But Sridhar remembers the night that Prabhupada knocks on his door, and he says, no, you shouldn't take sannyas right now, because all your family will be angry. They will think that I was the one who encouraged you to do it, and they'll be mad at me if you suddenly leave. So don't do this now. And so Prabhupada then went back home, and a few nights later he had another dream. And this dream was very, very vivid. His Guru Maharaj came in his dream. So he came back to Sridhar's door and he said, no, I have had another dream, and I have to leave this very moment. And Sridhar said, well, maybe you can take something called Bahudak sannyas. You can live nearby and the family can come, and gradually you can become detached. Everybody will be happy then. And he said, no, there's no question of doing something in between. I've got to leave right now. And so he went home, and he took nothing with him, really. I guess he had his japa bag, he had the clothes on his back, and he left. He just left home. And the next morning, Sridhar Maharaj remembers there was a lot of yelling and commotion in Prabhupada's house. He could look down from his room and see everybody coming out. Where is he? Where is he? Where did he go? And he just left. And he realized that, they're going to be mad at me. They're going to blame me for encouraging him to take sannyas. But that's one reason why Sridhar did not initiate Prabhupada as a sannyas. He sent him to his sannyas guru. He didn't want to have the responsibility on that. So Prabhupada didn't tell anyone. He had no money with him. He didn't take any food. He didn't have any bags. And he just left. And I believe he took shelter of the Gaudiya Math for a few days just to figure out what was going to happen next. There's another disciple or a person who knew Prabhupada before he came to the West. He was a disciple of Sridhar Maharaj, and he remembers that he lived in that room above Prabhupada's laboratory for 8 years, and he got a lot of association with Sridhar Prabhupada. And he says that Sridhar Maharaj instructed Bhakti Sundar to attend Prabhupada's classes every day. He used to teach a Bhagavad Gita class every day at his little temple. And at night time, he would be translating the Bhagavad Gita and writing it, and then in the daytime, he would just repeat the commentaries that he was studying in the nighttime. He remembers that Prabhupada's main focus in his preaching was trying to demolish the Mayavadi philosophers and the impersonalists. And that so often in the morning time, Prabhupada wouldn't even open his shop. He would be so absorbed in speaking Krishna Katha with Sridhar Maharaj that he would not even open his business. In fact, he was so absorbed in talking about Krishna that he would not eat. He would forget to eat. So they might start at 9 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 7 o'clock, talking about Krishna. And Bhakti Sundar, who was a disciple of Sridhar Maharaj, he would be there as a servant, but he would get very hungry. And, it would get to be about 11 o'clock. They'd missed breakfast. And so now he's getting hungry, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock. And he would get angry. Bhakti Sundar, who was a disciple of Sridhar, would get angry at Prabhupada and them for talking so much because he said, we're missing our prasadam, we're not going to eat anything. And he would have to stop. He would say, flag them down, stop talking, I'm hungry, I can't sit here, you got to get me some food. And Prabhupada would pause for a few minutes and get him something to eat so they could continue in their katha. And to hear that from me as a disciple of Prabhupada, when we saw Prabhupada, he would come in, sit on the Vyasasan, he would have his servants. You didn't get that picture of him on a day-to-day basis, but this book has given me a glimpse into Prabhupada's life was fully wrapped up in hearing and chanting. He would send also this servant of Sridhar out to distribute his Back to Godhead magazines. And all of those magazines were written in English because he was instructed by Bhaktisiddhanta to preach in English. But all the people on the street spoke Bengali. And even Bhakti Sundar didn't speak English. And so he said, how am I going to, what do I say to people if they don't read English? Or what do I say? Or how do I get them to take the magazine? And Prabhupada just said, just chant for them the Mahamantra, and they can look in the book. Mahamantra is the universal language. They can look in Back to Godhead magazine, and they can read about it. Prabhupada had so much faith in the chanting of the holy name, he didn't care whether people understood it from their own language. He understood that it actually was powerful enough on its own. Sometimes when Bhakti Sundar would go out on Sankirtan, people would ask him, why are you worshiping Krishna instead of Mother Kali? I suspect in Bengal that's a big one, right? And Prabhupada said that he should tell them, and Prabhupada himself in his preaching would tell them, excuse me, he would tell them, so tell me, what do you get if you worship Mother Kali? What are you going to eat? And who are you going to associate with? Mother Kali, she lives in a cremation grounds, and her food is the blood of her sons, the asuras. Her garland is made of the skulls of her sons after she kills them and sucks their blood. If you want to be her associate, well, we don't mind, we don't object. But Krishna lives in Vrindavan, where he has many girlfriends. He has lots of cheese and milk and sandesh and butter and fruits and sweets and many other wonderful things. There we shall eat and play with the cows and cowherd boys in the fresh water of the Yamuna, with nice gardens and beautiful forests. So we want that kind of life. So you can do what you like with Mother Kali. You can drink that blood and wear garlands of skulls, but we will associate with Krishna. It's better food and better friends. Pretty good preaching trick. Bhakti Sundar, he remembers that Prabhupada used to chastise him for using vegetable oil instead of ghee for cooking. That's an interesting thought, because I know we have a lot of vegans in our movement now and people who would prefer not to take ghee, but Prabhupada was insistent, even though the brahmacharis he was living with didn't have very much money to buy ghee. He said, at least you have to put a little bit of ghee in the food, because then it will be pleasing to Krishna. Krishna wants to have ghee. He remembers also, Bhakti Sundar remembers that Prabhupada's family life wasn't very happy. I mean, he was living with him for 8 years, so he could see that there was some tension there. And he had one son. This is something I never knew about till just recently. He had a son. Apparently, Prabhupada had 5 children, but he had one son named Prayagraj. And he had a kind of madness. He developed a kind of melancholy, like depression. So sort of free-floating anxiety, no real reason for it. He just was very depressed. And Prabhupada was very fond of this son because he was very intelligent. He had learned Shastra at a young age. But he met this girl in the neighborhood. And apparently it was bad association. And in Bengali culture, that was pretty prohibited in those days. And after that, somehow something changed with him. And he actually left the family home for 10 years. Nobody knew where he was. And Bhakti Sundar, the disciple of Sridhar, one day bumped into him on the street after he had been out of the home for 10 years. And Prabhupada's son Raj, he saw him on the street and he approached him. And he was looking like a beggar. And he was collecting torn pieces of paper and other things and putting them in his pocket. He was homeless. And when Prayag saw Bhakti Sundar, he recognized him and greeted him with, "Oh, Govinda, how are you?" And Bhakti Sundar said he watched Prabhupada's son by the side of the road to see what he would be doing next. And he said he just went on down the road. He greeted him, and he went on down the road picking up pieces of trash and putting them in his pocket. And he wondered to himself, what could have happened to such a boy? And he was such a promising young boy who had been very attracted to Shastra and whatnot, and all of a sudden that changed. Later on, Prabhupada asked Bhakti Sundar if he had seen his son anywhere. Have you seen my son Prayagraj anywhere? And Bhakti Sundar explained to Prabhupada what he had seen, that he had seen him as a homeless beggar on the street. And Prabhupada became very upset that he was roaming loose and that he was not being cared for. Clearly he had some mental illness. And there are other places where I have read that Prabhupada at one point tried to send him to an English counselor, therapist, and it seemed to help for a while, but in the end he never really got better. But Prabhupada instructed his sister Pishama that she should search him out, find my son, and take care of him. And you've made a vow that you would do this. So Pishama took responsibility for trying to find his son and take care of him. So that was, for me, as myself as a professional counselor, that was very interesting to know that Prabhupada, sometimes we think that people who are famous and enlightened, they haven't had a struggle in their family life. And clearly Prabhupada had his own struggle and somehow managed to emerge from it as an enlightened soul. At a certain point, he had a meeting with his sister and one of his sons and the disciple of Sridhar, and they were discussing, practically, I really probably need to follow the order of my guru, but who will take care of my family? I have 5 kids, I have a daughter who's not yet married, so who will take care? And Pishima, in this meeting, she says that, who's taking care of your family now? Since you've been preaching, you don't have any money. There's no money. And so it won't matter so much if you're not there, because you're not bringing any money. You're so busy with your preaching. And so Pishima, again, she said, I will take care of your family. I have 5 sons, and they have some income, and I will help you. There's no point for you to stay in a family who's not interested in Krishna consciousness. So they had already had that conversation before Prabhupada had that dream of Bhaktisiddhanta. So I suppose that he was rest assured that his sister would come through for him. Many of you who have been to Vrindavan. Who's been to Vrindavan before? Yeah, oh yeah, so you are. These are not new things, but you know that Prabhupada spent a good bit of time in Radha Damodar Temple. He has this beautiful little place there. And people remember him living there. And that he kind of lived there between 1960 and 1965. He would play the mridanga in the courtyard after he took his bath in the Yamuna River. And there was a devotee named Nirmal Chand who used to sometimes go with Prabhupada in the wintertime to take bath in the Yamuna. And if you've ever taken bath in the Yamuna, even though it's not cold like in America where we're getting snow, it's pretty cold in Vrindavan in the wintertime. But he learned from Prabhupada, he said, that if you take your bath in the Yamuna, where it's very shallow, like 2 or 3 feet deep, the water is a lot warmer, even in the morning when it's cold. That was news to me. I had no idea that was the strategy in taking bath in the winter in Vrindavan. You find a shallow spot that is got warmed with the sun, and then even in the morning, it has maintained its heat, so you're not freezing to take a shower. So after Prabhupada and then would go walk down to the Yamuna and he'd take his morning bath, he would come back to Radha Damodar Temple, and he would sit in this little kitchen room. If you've been there, you know he had a little teeny kitchen room. And he would just sing there by himself with kartals and have bhajan just by himself. And he especially liked this song called Sri Rupa Manjari Pada. And then he would sit in front of the Rupa Goswami's samadhi for an hour or more and chant. At 11:30 in the morning, this was like a daily routine that Prabhupada had, he would sit on the roof of his little room, and he would massage himself with mustard oil. Later on, when he had disciples, they would do that, but he had maintained, even with disciples, he maintained that schedule. And then he would go for Bhoga Arti at the Radha Damodar Temple. And he taught this Nirmal, who was sort of following him around in those days, how to chant the entire Bhagavad Gita using a special tune that would help him remember it. And when Prabhupada finally went to America, he would write this young Brahmachari, please come and help me train my disciples how to cook and do pujari service. But he could never come because he had an elder parent he needed to take care of. Then in the evening, Prabhupada would have some discussion, lecture, kirtan, right off of the porch of his little room. And by 5 o'clock, he would take shower and then go visit the different temples, like Madan Moham Temple and Govindaji Temple. Nirmal noticed that Prabhupada slept maybe 5 hours, but often 2 or 3 hours a night. And he noticed that Prabhupada was always thinking of Bhagavatam slokas. And if one would come into his head, he would remember a sloka in connection with something that was happening. He would immediately stop whatever he was doing, if he was walking, if he was sleeping, and write it down. So he was always preparing for his mission. There was a godbrother of Sripad Nayananda, I guess, Sripad Nayananda Das Babaji. He remembers that Prabhupada was so humble that he offered dandavats to anyone who had been initiated before him. So Prabhupada, he actually met Bhaktisiddhanta 11 years before he took initiation. Still, he would offer that level of respect to people who had gotten initiated before him. And Nayananda remembers that sometimes they would, a party of brahmacharis would suddenly show up at Prabhupada's house. Often it was so late at night that everybody was sleeping. And still, Prabhupada would get up, open the door, welcome them in. He would give them his own room to sleep in. He would cook for them. And in the morning, he would get up and cook breakfast. So Prabhupada immediately received unannounced guests who were Vaishnavas. He was he had such a servant attitude. Later on, Nayananda says that when Prabhupada was living in Calcutta, he explained to him that he didn't keep installed deities in his home because his wife and family weren't very favorable to Krishna consciousness. Actually, the truth is, Prabhupada arranged for his wife to get initiated. I did not know that. You know, we always have this notion that Prabhupada's wife was sort of not real, devotional, but she was actually initiated by a Bhakti Saranga Maharaj, who also initiated Prabhupada's sister, Pishima. So even though she was initiated, she really never had a taste for devotional life. So that's possible. Just because we're initiated doesn't necessarily mean that we have pure love for Krishna. It's just a beginning. He did have, Prabhupada had his own room in the house. He had a room above the laboratory, but he had a room in the house. And he had an altar with pictures. He didn't want to install deities in the house because his family were not very favorable and they wouldn't follow the necessary principles to do deity worship. But he always worshipped with so much awe and reverence pictures of Radha Krishna, Gaur Nitai, and Bhaktisiddhanta. And he actually had a little picture of Sridhar Maharaj on his altar that he would worship as well. And Nayananda asked him why he did that. And he said, because I accept him as my Shiksha Guru. I thought that was interesting as well. Prabhupada chanted 64 rounds every day, even though he was working full time. Who has a hard time managing 16 rounds and working full time? Is that a hard thing to do? Yeah. Can you imagine? I mean, I suspect in India, a full day of work is 8 hours. Is it different or not? Are people working 6 hours, 4 hours? What's a full day of work in old India? Oh, yeah, okay. So on top of that, he was chanting 64 rounds. That's amazing. And then when he was finished his rounds, after work, if he had done everything he needed to do, he would immediately, if he had time off, he would go associate with devotees in the nearby temple, or he'd get on a train and go to Navadvip or Mayapur. He never wasted time. And I know I have in my life wasted so much time. So when I read this, it's so inspiring to see, my goodness, what his standard is. Prabhupada told us, that we are going to have to run as his disciples to catch up. If you think you're going to follow me, you're going to have to really speed it up because we're really behind. And so this is very inspiring to me. This is a nice story where Nayananda remembers Bhaktisiddhanta was pacing up and down, chanting upstairs in a Gaudiya Mat in Mayapur area. And Prabhupada had come to see him as a householder. And, he didn't go in the room. There were a bunch of brahmacharis and sannyasis chanting with Bhaktisiddhanta in a room. And when Bhaktisiddhanta saw Prabhupada in the doorway, he motioned for him to come in. And Nayananda, a brahmachari, was very surprised how much affection Bhaktisiddhanta Swami gave a householder. In Bengal, in those days, that was not, householders were not considered first-class citizens, but I think that's changed now. But it was interesting that for Nayananda to see how much respect and how much honor he gave Bhakti Prabhupada. And he remembers, if you've read any of the memories of Prabhupada, you'll know this story about how on the last parikram that Bhaktisiddhanta had, and on the very last day of the parikram, they had all gathered, thousands of disciples had gathered, and Bhaktisiddhanta looked very deeply at someone who was sitting behind Nayananda, a Brahmachari, and when he looked behind him, it was Srila Prabhupada, and he said, it was practically the last thing he said on that parikram, is that however long it will take, there's one of my disciples, he didn't name Prabhupada, he said, one of my disciples will cross the ocean and bring back the whole world. And that was clearly Srila Prabhupada. Very, very awesome. He also said that Prabhupada was a universal physician and that he must take his cure to the whole world outside of India and to the West. Śrīmad Acharya, a different disciple of Bhakti Pragya Keshava Maharaj, he says he remembers when Prabhupada was a householder, he would always bring a bag of sweets with him to the mat. And he would try to encourage the Brahmacharis to chant by awarding them with a sweet for chanting so many rounds. I mean, that's amazing. You would think that the Brahmacharis would be setting an example of chanting, but look at Prabhupada, he's giving them sweets to get them to chant. So that must have been a very low standard of bhakti. But anyway, that you almost like you would do that with your pet or something, and then get him to jump, you give him a sweet. A little strange. But he was very respectful, even though, to all the renounced people and elders. He always told his godbrothers, please come with me. I'm going to the West. I don't know when, but I want you to help me. And nobody helped. So I know that's true in all the memories. He wanted so much that his godbrothers would work together on that, but it didn't happen. It never happened. Sripad remembers that Prabhupada often was crying when he sang the Guru Astakam prayers or Jaya Radha Madhava. We saw that a few times when we were in Prabhupada's presence, that he would weep, tears would come down his eyes. But that was not just true of us. There are many associates of Prabhupada in Vrindavan and elsewhere who witnessed that. When Prabhupada would chant, he would cry at a very, very deep level of bhakti. There's so many. I want to. We only have a limited amount of time, so let's see. There's a memory from Gor Krishna Goswami, who attended a seminar of Prabhupada when he was only 12, and he said that Prabhupada mostly lectured in Sanskrit. Interestingly enough, I know when we met Prabhupada, he was speaking in Hindi and Bengali mostly, and English, but he was mainly preaching in Sanskrit. And Gor Krishna remembers going to a movie theater with Prabhupada when he was a householder to see the movie of Lord Chaitanya that was playing there. Have you all seen that Neil Chal, the Lord Chaitanya movie? It's in black and white. It's you've seen that, yeah. I don't know if that's the one they went to see, but I thought it was interesting that Prabhupada went to a movie theater to see that. And he remembers noticing that Prabhupada only used rough paper when he was, he didn't have a computer and even a typewriter. He was doing an awful lot of his work was with a pencil and a paper to make notes. And his only possessions really were his japa beads and this rough paper and pencil. He remembers that Prabhupada would sometimes come to their house in Vrindavan, and he would only take prasadam and any water or anything if he was invited. He never would mention that he needed food. He always waited to be invited. There's another Pishama who lived in Imlital. I was living in Vrindavan in 1976, so I remember meeting this woman, Pishama, at Imlital. There was like a Mataji's ashram there, and she was living there. She had moved to Vrindavan when she was 20 years old because her husband had died. So she was still living there in 1976, and I remember seeing her. And when she was interviewed, she said she remembered that after Bhaktisiddhanta left the planet, Prabhupada approached his wife and his sister and said, so who are you going to take Diksha from now? the guru has left. Who are you going to take initiation from? So Prabhupada arranged for his wife and his sister to take initiation from Prabhupada's godbrother. I said that before, but in connection to Pishama, she was also she was a god sister of Prabhupada's sister, and often, even as a young girl living in Vrindavan, Prabhupada would call for her to come and offer service to his deities. And he used to refer to her as Beti, Prabha Beti, which means, as you know, daughter. And he often told her, because she worked, she was a very hard worker, to first Harinam, then Hari Bhajan, then Seva. He said to her, if all you are doing is working, this is not good. Always do kirtan and don't waste time. And I know most of us, we probably get busy. We're so passionate in working. And then if we have time, we're nodding off, sleeping and chanting and stuff. But Prabhupada tried to help us see that first we need to take care of our sadhana, and then seva is important too. But often it's backwards. You know, we do a lot of work and then we're too tired to really chant or chant well. When Prabhupada when Prabhupada became a sannyasi, he would no longer allow this Pishama to cook for him or do services there. Even she was 25 years old, and he would have discourses in his room or on the balcony or in the porch of his room. But he would tell her, don't say anything during the discourse. He didn't want to have a woman talking. And so she said he was very strict when he took sannyas not to have any association with women. But after he had gone to America and had disciples that were men and women, when he came back to Vrindavan, his whole mood had changed. He became more like a father, and he became very friendly with her and treated her like his daughter. And so it was a totally different mood than when he was just a sannyasi. He had sort of realized perhaps that, you know, as a teacher and as a guru, you really do need to have relationship with the people that you're teaching. And he instructed her to please come and help train some of the Western lady disciples who apparently in Vrindavan had come and they were all dancing, go-go dancing kirtans, and Prabhupada wanted her to teach them how to be chaste and live properly, you know, live in a proper way. This is a really interesting little memory by Sripad Bhaktivedanta Vaishnava Maharajas, who's a disciple of Bhakti Pragya Keshava Maharaj Prabhupada's sannyas guru. He remembers that Prabhupada, before he came to the West, he went to Dr. Radhakrishnan to beg him, please give me a letter so I can get a visa to go to America. And Dr. Radhakrishna was skeptical, like, okay, what are you going to do? You're one person. What can you do? How much effect can you have going to the West by yourself? So Prabhupada said, let's do a test. I will show you what I can do. And so Dr. Radhakrishnan sent him to a prison for a month, and that he would go every day all by himself to a prison and chanted with and for the prisoners. And after Dr. Radhakrishna saw the results, that the prisoners became ecstatic in chanting, he said, okay, I will give you a visa. I can see there's potency in your preaching. So Prabhupada used to tell Sripad, if I go to the foreign countries, they will be very angry with me. So I will treat them as Nitai Pada did with Jagai Madai, and I will get them to chant Hari Bol. And Prabhupada said they are like beasts, and they should be transformed into men. I will encourage them to chant the Hare Krishna mantra and to avoid eating flesh and drinking intoxications. And in this way, they will become human beings. And I know some of you probably haven't been born in Australia, right? I mean, you kind of come over. And so I don't know, I haven't been back to India for a long time. I lived there in the 90s. I went to Mayapur in 2016. But I understand it's really changed a lot. I mean, you know, with computer and stuff, it's very modernized. You have, especially the cities are real high tech. But but I bet when you came here, maybe you did, maybe India has become that degraded also with so much influence of Westerner, but to think in terms of coming here and seeing how people live here, can you see why Prabhupada would say that Western people are like beasts? You can see it, how animalistic and ignorant it is. I mean, maybe that's what has inspired you to come to the temple, because when you watch the way this Western culture operates, it is so demonic. And the more you know about Krishna, the more horrible and illogical it is. But I suspect in India you have politicians who are pretty bad too. But I mean, Prabhupada was clear that what he was doing is coming to the West to transform people who live like animals. And I used to, when I was, my children were growing up in Vrindavan, we used to have these little Amar Chitra Katha cartoon books. Do you know those? Those children's books? Amar Chitra Katha books. And I remember while I was reading to my son these books, there were these Rakshasas. You know, you have these Rakshasa pictures, you have, you know, Krishna and Arjuna, the Pandavas, and then you have these pictures of Rakshasas, and they're really fat. You know, their faces are really horrible because they're eating so much meat. It makes your body bloated if you're eating a lot of meat. And I thought, wow, that's what we look like. That's the West. That's the West. That's it. That's it. They got that right. That's what the demonic civilization looks like all bloated from alcohol and meat. It's all, yeah. And he also said that you know, the devotees who are coming to the movement in the West were probably Indians in their last life. You know, maybe you guys were Westerners in your last life and you're coming back to Australia. I think we kind of swap back and forth. I don't know how that works, but I mean, karma is at play here and reincarnation. So it's interesting that you had a bunch of Americans who were very attracted to Indian culture, and Prabhupada said, oh yeah, they were probably Indians in their last life. Maybe they came to America, they were enamored by economic development, and then they got fed up and they joined the Hare Krishna movement. I thought that was interesting. Another little story is from a guy named Sukhananda, and he was a Brahmachari living at the Gaudiya Math, and he remembers he was 11 years old when he found a book that Prabhupada had written. I had no idea. Prabhupada had a bunch of books that he wrote before he wrote Krishna conscious books on naturopathy. I had no idea. And one of the cures that books said, the scientific water treatment by Dr. Abhay Charande. And it was some kind of naturopathic water cure that you would take Ganges water and you'd rub the body and do massaging, and then you'd go hot. You'd immerse someone in a hot sitz bath and then a cold one and a hot one, and somehow it was supposed to do something. But he took that book, this 11-year-old found the book on the shelf and he took it home and he studied it, and he actually used Prabhupada's book to get his degree in naturopathy. It was such a scientific book. And then when Prabhupada was nearing the end of his life, he called for Sukhananda. And he asked him if he would do that treatment on himself. He would do that water treatment on Prabhupada. And so when he asked him to do that, he asked him, can you save me from death? I have so much work to do. And so Prabhupada had not eaten for 27 days by that time. And he felt like he was getting ready to die. But then he did the treatment. The Sukhananda did that water treatment. And after that, Prabhupada said he was very inspired. So he helped give him energy at the end of his life. Prabhupada also talked to a devotee named Kshirodakshai Maharaj, who I knew. He was based in England, but later he took sannyas and moved to Vrindavan. But he said he remembers Prabhupada telling him that when he came to the West, he tried, like anything, to explain to people why they should chant Hare Krishna, the benefits of it. He said, I got no results when I was just trying to argue with the philosophy, and he said nobody changed, nobody came. He said, but what started the Hare Krishna movement was when he sat down in Tompkins Square Park and I performed kirtan. He said that's when people understood by seeing the example of devotion. It wasn't all the talking philosophy. It was when he started to chant. That's when things started to happen. A devotee, Prabhupada Acharya, he remembers when he was little, Prabhupada would always have a bag of sweets and he would feed children. And there was a group of children who would go to the Rupa Goswami tomb and they'd steal the money out. You know how people put money in coins. They'd throw coins in the pilgrimage place. And when they thought Prabhupada wasn't looking, they would, take sticks and stuff and fish out the paisa from the thing. There were 3 of them. 2 would fish and 1 would stand by Prabhupada's window to make sure he wasn't looking, They thought he wasn't looking. And Prabhupada caught them. He caught them stealing money out of the Rupa Goswami tomb. And he told them, you don't need to do that. I will buy your whatever you want. Don't steal. But he was a boy, and then he, of course, grew up, and he used to go to see Prabhupada as an adult, but remembering as a child he was stealing money and Prabhupada had caught him. He would give them something called a pi, which is 1/3 of a paisa. I don't even know if you make that coin in India anymore, right? It's just such a nothing coin. But in those days, you had have 3 pi would be a paisa, and he would buy the boys roasted chickpeas and some rabri. He loved children, and he was always very kind. There was one devotee who brought a group of teenagers to see Prabhupada at Radha Damodar Temple. And they were part of the, what do they call that? The Advaita Anita, what do they call them? They were descendants of the Goswamis, so they felt very entitled that, well, we were born in Vrindavan, and we're descendants of the Goswamis, and so we're really the ones who are worthy to worship, not these Western people. And so he wanted to prove to Prabhupada that Westerners were not worthy to be initiated brahmanas. So they asked Prabhupada, well, are not brahmanas the only ones who can do ritual properly? And Prabhupada immediately countered that anyone who's a Krishna Bhakta from any caste who is sincere, then they are better than any brahmana who doesn't fulfill their vows. So they weren't satisfied with that. They were a little impudent, and so they argued with Prabhupada, and they said, well, tell us, the children of a snake, won't they always be a snake? Or a cow's offspring will always be a cow? And so we are descendants of Nityananda Prabhu and Advaita Prabhu. So we have that spirit, even if we don't perform our duties, we still are entitled to worship. And Prabhupada said, no. We recognize a person only by his deeds, not by his birth. And this is the creed of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. It's not by caste or by inheritance. Just because your parents were Brahmins doesn't necessarily mean that you are automatically given the privilege of performing ritual. He was reflecting that, nobody saw Prabhupada as a saint when they knew him in Vrindavan. They didn't imagine that he was going to become this world preacher. They just saw him as an ordinary sadhu. He would actually practice madhukari. Prabhupada would go house to house and beg for a little food. He would be singing Jai Shri Gornitai or something, and people would come out and give him food. And if he didn't get a gift of food, then he wouldn't eat. You don't think of Prabhupada like that, especially up in this room in his quarters. It's so opulent. And you have that picture of Prabhupada sitting with his back turned and he's eating prasadam in this beautiful room. There was a time Prabhupada wanted the blessings of a group of Brijbasis. He had some friends, and they kept saying, don't waste your time going to the West. If you go across the ocean, these are mlechas and yavanas over there. What will you do? And Prabhupada, one day he came with his 3 volumes. He finally printed Śrīmad Bhāgavatam, and they all gathered around, and he said, please bless. He passed around the 3 Bhagavatams. He said, please bless these books, that they will touch the hearts of anyone who comes in contact with them. And then Prabhupada started to think, well, if these books go to the West, they need to have somebody to go with them. So please bless me that I will accompany these books to the West, so that they will touch lives. There's an anonymous person that they didn't reveal the name to, but he said that he had met Prabhupada when he was 10 years old in Mayapur. And the devotees had just purchased the land in Mayapur. And all of the people in the Gaudiya Math warned everybody, don't go near these Western ISKCON people because they're CIA. They're coming from the CIA. And, if any Bengali boy once goes to ISKCON, they're going to kidnap him and force him to go to the West and marry a Western girl. That must have been a really bad thing. Yeah. And so anyway, this anonymous person, he went by him, of course, if you tell a 10-year-old, he was just 10 years old, if you tell a 10-year-old not to do something, they're definitely going to do it. So after he heard all that, he decided to go by himself to Mayapur to meet Prabhupada and to see for himself what would happen. And he saw Prabhupada sitting outside that thatched hut where, if you've been to Mayapur, you've seen it, it's still there. And he was just sitting there, and where they were building those front gates, and he was so attracted to Prabhupada that he couldn't move. I mean, he was just looking at Prabhupada and staring at him. And Prabhupada noticed that someone was staring at him, as you would. And he said, so who are you? Well, I mean, who are you? What are you doing? And he said, he told him who he was. And so Prabhupada looked at him and he said, yes, I would like you to help me in this work of Bhaktisiddhanta. This is the order for all devotees. They have to spread Mahaprabhu's mission. So this little 10-year-old boy at that time, he said, no, I'm too young and I don't know English. And then, right then, two very tall, huge Western devotees, guys, white guys, they came up and when he saw them, he became really scared. He said, I remember as a 10-year-old seeing these two really big white guys come up, I guess they were servants of Prabhupada. And he said, in my mind, as a 10-year-old, their faces looked quite fierce, and I became so frightened. I can't imagine looking at white people. If you've never seen, some heavy, I don't know. He was just scared. I guess if you're looking at Hidimbi and those kind of people, he started to walk backwards. He was so frightened by these two white devotees. He'd probably never seen Western people before. He had just come home from school. He had books in his hand. He started to walk backwards because he was afraid of them. And then when he got back far enough, he turned around, he started running and running and running. He ran into the rice paddy fields. He jumped into a pond with his clothes on and all his books, and then he went home. He was just so scared to see these Western devotees. Unbelievable to me. But then when he grew up, the next time he saw Prabhupada was with Narayan Maharaj, who had come to see Prabhupada at the end of his life. And he was a disciple of Narayan Maharaj. And when he was sitting next to Prabhupada's bed, on his bed, Prabhupada was very weak and he was basically dying. He motioned to him to come closer to the bed. And he whispered Hare Krishna in his ear. And when he felt that sound vibration in his ear, he said, I knew at that moment that Prabhupada had initiated me as his disciple. So all those years, having been so afraid, finally, maybe 20 years later, 10 years later, he was able to meet Prabhupada one last time. I want to make sure I get, some of these are really good, but there's just not a lot of time. One Brijbasi remembers, his name was Gopal, that Prabhupada had a fever and in his Radha Damodar room. And he was sitting covered up with a cloth and a blanket reading Śrīmad Bhāgavatam. And Gopal asked him, are you not feeling well? And Prabhupada said, no, but this is my little medicine cure, reading Śrīmad Bhāgavatam. It will be helpful. So the next day, Gopal comes back to see how Prabhupada is doing, and he looked completely healthy, happy. He was writing again, and Gopal asked him, so you're feeling better today? And Prabhupada said, yes. At night, my Prabhupada, Bhaktisiddhanta, came in my dream, and he encouraged me that you are working like Narottam Das Thakur, Srinivasa Acharya, and Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. And Prabhupada said, I have received the mercy of my Gurudev. He blessed me and he has given me power. I was too much anxious for the Bhagavatam commentary. That's why he got sick. He was just worrying about getting it right, the commentary. And then Bhaktisiddhanta appeared to him in a dream and said, "You just write, and all the 6 Goswamis will help you." And he said while he was sick, Bhaktisiddhanta had come to him in a dream, dressed as a sannyasi, and he had not taken sannyas yet. This was just the beginning of getting those dreams. He told Gopal, when he was visiting Prabhupada at Radha Damodar, that he had seen or had a vision of Jiva Goswami, Sanatana Goswami, and Rupa Goswami actually appeared to him at the Rupa Goswami Mandir. He said it was like a vision. They were standing there in their full form. He said they spoke to him and gave him guidance in writing. Such an exalted person. Prabhupada also shared with Gopal that one time he was chanting at midnight. Prabhupada used to get up really early, probably midnight, 1 o'clock, and he was chanting in the midnight, and he often heard dogs barking. If you've ever been to Vrindavan, you know there's lots of dogs barking, and at night time everything's quiet, but you can hear in the distance these dogs barking. And Prabhupada explained to Gopal that sometimes he heard melodious flute sounds coming from Seva Kunj. Couple of times. He said, I knew that this was not my imagination because I could hear the dogs barking. I knew I was fully awake and I wasn't imagining these things because of the dogs. But he said, I know this was extraordinary transcendental flute playing. Another day, Gopal was walking by the Keshi Ghat in Vrindavan in the heat of summer. And I've stayed in Vrindavan in the summer. It's a horrible heat. It's 120 degrees. Have you been in the summer to Vrindavan? It's just horrible. But Prabhupada, he was walking by Keshi Ghat, and he saw Prabhupada alone, where there's a little island. Sometimes the water goes down and you have a little piece of dirt there in the Yamuna. And Prabhupada was alone on one of these islands in the middle of the Yamuna, and he had prepared a little sand hill, a small hill, and he stuck his danda in the middle of this hill, and then he was circumambulating by himself the hill, chanting Hare Krishna, Hare Bol, and he said he described him like a child. He was gleefully doing this, but he was all alone, walking, dancing around this sannyas danda. And then later he saw him doing it again with 3 or 4 other people. They were all clapping and dancing around this sannyas danda in an island on Yamuna. I can't imagine it. It's just something. One time Gopal remembers there was a very old lady who came to the temple from the Yamuna to take her bath. And she had a walking stick that was really beaten and broken. And Prabhupada called out to her, "Oh, Guru Ma, you please take my stick and give me your stick. I want your blessing." And the old woman started to cry. And she said, "Oh, Baba, you're just joking with me. I'm not able to take your cane. It will just be stolen. Someone will snatch it from me. So you please keep it for yourself." And then Prabhupada affectionately gave her some rupees. And just like I had said in another anecdote, that Gopal also remembers Prabhupada collecting door to door to get his food. Some of the Western boys, when Prabhupada brought the first group of Westerners to Vrindavan, the Brijbasis remember they would sometimes steal the food. They'd go, be on the rickshaw, and they'd go by a milkwala, and they'd snatch some food, and they thought they were being clever, like, Krishna used to steal the butter. Krishna, we can do it too. But the Brijbasis got really angry about that. They felt really mad about that, and they went to Prabhupada and they complained. And one of the Brijbasis said to Prabhupada, "You're performing a circus, you have brought with you some lions and you've left them in the market?" And Prabhupada said, "Oh, you're joking." And Vishwambara Goswami said, "I am joking, but they are snatching from the locals all over the place." So then in the evening class, Prabhupada said, who is stealing food from the market? Who is taking this food? And so 2 or 3 of his Western disciples, they admitted they had been stealing. And he said, "But Lord Krishna also stole butter and curd. Why not? We can do that." And Prabhupada said, "Krishna could lift Govardhan Hill. Can you do that?" and of course they couldn't. But he said Prabhupada was so kind. He said, Brijabasis will give you anything, you don't have to steal it. He didn't like that. Looking back also, even I was one of those hippies who joined the movement and stuff, but even having lived in Vrindavan for 10 years and watching Westerners come, I was embarrassed myself. What to speak of Prabhupada tolerating us. It's unbelievable how he, by himself, had to teach so many people. It was just amazing. One of the memories was from a person whose father was a king of a place called Mungar. I don't know where that is. Maybe you know where that is, Mungar. And he and his wife were practicing Vaishnavism very strictly. And his ancestors were really Ram Bhaktas. But he was a friend of Prabhupada. And he was so austere that, he got married. And after 5 years, they'd never had any children. And that's a big deal for people who are kings who need to have a son to pass down their dynasty. And this person who's sharing the memory, he's saying that his father had gotten spies to try and see what was going on in their bedroom, that they didn't have any children yet. And so the spies said, well, they're not even sleeping in the same, they're just sleeping on different parts of the room. That's why they're not having children. They're just chanting Hare Krishna, or they're sleeping in separate beds, and they're not going to get any children like that. So of course the relatives are like, oh my God, we have to have some children, because otherwise the dynasty won't go on. And so they finally convinced them to have one child, and later on, they moved to Vrindavan, and that's where they met Prabhupada. And even there, even though he was a king of Mungar, he himself would go barefoot and beg food, just like Prabhupada. He was such a advanced Vaishnava. Prabhupada had such great association. There was one Vaishnava. Let's see, what time is it? There was one Vaishnava whose husband was a community leader in Vrindavan. And he had a dream that he wanted Vrindavan to look beautiful again. If you've been to Vrindavan, it's much better than it was maybe 40, 50 years ago. But a lot of torn buildings, and people throw trash around, and it's really hard to make the connection with the Krishna that we read about in Krishna book and some of the places in Vrindavan, because so much stuff is in disrepair. But this one Lal Patak, he had this dream his whole life that we would transform Vrindavan back into a garden. And so he used to talk to Prabhupada about it. We need to fix Vrindavan so it's a beautiful place. And Prabhupada said, yes, this is a nice idea. He said, but I have another plan how we will do it. And so then he would give his vision that if we were to get Westerners to come, they would come obviously with their money, and they would be able to help transform Vrindavan into a more, I guess, habitable place. I haven't been to Vrindavan lately, but everyone tells me you've got high-rise buildings there. It's not like it was when I was there in the 90s. So I'm not sure. I like that new Western look of Vrindavan. I very much like the village thing. But anyway, Lal Patak appreciated that Prabhupada had his own vision, and that in fact, now that people are aware of Krishna, there's so many more people coming. A lot of it is very touristy, but Prabhupada had this strategy of if he could give people Krishna in books, they would be attracted to come, and in fact they did. One time, Bhakta Madhava Maharaj remembers that he saw Prabhupada standing by himself at the gate of a large house, just waiting. And when he walked by, he asked Prabhupada, "What are you waiting for, Maharaj?" And Prabhupada said, "I'm waiting to get 5 rupee donation from here." And after some hours, it was very hot. It was one of those summer 120-degree weather. And Bhakta Madhava had gone and done his errand, and when he returned riding his bike, he saw Prabhupada is still standing there by the gate of this house. And so he asked Prabhupada, "Did you get the 5 rupees that you were waiting for?" I guess 5 rupees was a lot more in those days. Still not a lot. And Prabhupada said, "No, the gentleman has not even arrived yet, but I'm going to wait." And then Bhakta Madhava Maharaj said to Prabhupada, "Let's go now. I will give you the 5 rupees. And then Prabhupada said, can you give me that 5 rupees every month? And Bhaktivedanta agreed to give him 5 rupees every month. And he felt so moved by Prabhupada's sincerity that he said, is there anything else you need? Are you short of anything? I will get it for you. And Bhaktivedanta said, Prabhupada seemed so poor. He had rips in his clothes, and he took him shopping. He just took him shopping, got him dhotis, he got some chaddars and whatever. And he said, instead of 5 rupees, I will give you 10 rupees. And I suspect that was for his rent. Prabhupada needed to have that to pay for his rent. Nirmal Chandra Goswami, he's the son of the Radha Damodar Mahant. He remembers when he was a young boy, he ran away from home in Vrindavan, and he had only his pants and shirt on his back, and he caught a bus to Delhi, and he shows up at Prabhupada's room in Delhi, in Chipawada. And when Prabhupada opened the door, he said, oh, you are here, so what service? Who's doing your service at Radha Damodar? And he explained, oh, it's okay, there's plenty of pujaris there, they don't need me. And Prabhupada asked him, why did you choose to run away to come to me? And he said, I want to live with you here. And Prabhupada said, okay, very good, I will take you. And Prabhupada let him stay there for about 5 or 6 days. And unknown to him, he had immediately sent a postcard to his father in Vrindavan as soon as he arrived in Delhi, and said, your son is okay, he's with me, because he knew that his father would be worried that he'd run away suddenly and not told anybody. And they still have the postcard in their family home. They've kept that postcard all that time because they realized how special it was. And Nirmal Chandra said when he showed up at Prabhupada's room, he had no clean clothes, so Prabhupada let him use his clothes. So he was walking around running errands in sannyas saffron clothing in Delhi, and he bumped into his brother, who was like, what are you doing? Where did you get the sannyas clothing? And Prabhupada gave his own clothes for him to wear, which was really amazing to me also. So I'm aware of the time, and I also want to give a little time for us to discuss if there's any questions or even any reflections. I know we've heard a lot, and certainly if you want to hear more, there's so many books about Prabhupada, but for me this was extremely inspiring to know that Prabhupada, his whole life was working on his own Krishna consciousness, and Krishna used it. And so we don't have to wait for our life to change, for us to start putting devotional life into our devotional bank account. So I'm wondering if anybody has a takeaway. You may not have a question because there's not a lot of answers I can give you, but maybe it's a reflection. Yes? Yeah, we don't have... somebody needs to donate a couple of these to this temple, so you have one for the...
Hare Krishna Mataji, thank you for the nice class. My question was that how did Prabhupada go back to Godhead?
How did he go back to Godhead?
Yeah, how did he pass away?
How did he pass away? You haven't seen the movie of how he died. Oh my. I bet some of the people in here know that answer to that question, right? She's asking, how did Prabhupada leave the body? How did he die? Oh. What? Yeah, it's a long story, and I'm not sure I can recount the whole story, but it's in a lot of the books of his memory books of his disciples. He knew probably since he was born that he had a certain amount of years. I mean, in Vedic philosophy, there's this understanding that we have, from the time we're born, the heart has a certain amount of heartbeats. It's like a battery. When the battery's dead, you need a new battery. So he knew, there was an astrologer, he knew he had a certain amount of years, and he knew he was getting close. And he was a doctor himself, so he could identify that he was getting sick. In the last 6 months he couldn't eat, and he had various pains and whatever. But when it got to the point where he could no longer walk, he was mostly in bed. He had his disciples massaging him and playing kirtan for him. And there was a moment in his dying process where he stopped eating and drinking and speaking. And his disciples thought, oh my goodness, he's going to die now. And they were begging him, please don't. We need you. We don't know what we're going to do without you. And after a long time, Prabhupada suddenly said, well, if I'm going to live, you better get me some fried eggplant, puris, because nobody can live if they don't eat. So he stayed for a little bit of time, and then it became very clear that it was time for him to leave his body. And he continued to translate his books even up to the last hour. There's video. I don't know if your mother would want you to watch it. It's pretty sad to see, but it's something real, and I think we should all see those last time of Prabhupada. I think it's on YouTube even, if you can see it. But what's so amazing is Prabhupada was still, while he was dying, translating Bhagavatam. So that's the best I can do. Any other reflections or takeaway? Did you hear anything tonight that you'd never known about Prabhupada or that was inspiring? Nothing. Nothing? Think. Yeah.
Who is the more dearest to Prabhupada among his disciples? May I know who is more dearest to Prabhupada among his disciples?
I don't. He's asked the question, who is the dearest amongst Prabhupada disciples? I cannot answer that. Would you have an idea? I mean, where did that question come from? Are you thinking just like it was very obvious that Prabhupada was very dear to Bhaktivedanta, that maybe before he left the planet he had in his mind that there would be someone to carry it?
No, I was reading the Prabhupada Leela.
Uh-huh.
So, many of his disciples are, he has given equal importance. So far I have read the book, but I don't know who is
My sense is that Prabhupada wanted us to work cooperatively, and so he commissioned every single disciple, whether they were a man or a woman, to carry on his mission. And so I think he really wanted us to not do what the Gaudiya Mat did, and they all gathered themselves in different temples, and they had their little disciples. And we have lots of preachers in this movement, and they have disciples, and they're working together as a group, and it's quite remarkable. We have a lot of mistakes that are happening, but it's an attempt to fulfill Prabhupada's. I don't get a feeling that he had somebody picked out, or I don't get that feeling. Anything else? No reflection? What will you be thinking about when you walk out of that door? Anything?
One question. I'm loud enough.
I'll repeat your question. Go ahead.
What about the story that means choose tea or me, and Prabhupada left the family? And in your description, Prabhupada left family in sannyas. So I'm confused.
Well, I didn't hear it. Say that once again.
Prabhupada in the Lilamrita says tea or me. He asked his wife, choose tea or me. She chose tea, and then he left.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of things that happened in between that. I don't think it's conflicting. I think she probably was drinking tea, and I think she probably was not interested to participate. He had like a little bhakti vriksha thing going on in his home, because that was the instruction, is that you make your home a temple. And his family didn't want to be part of it. So you imagine, he tried. His oldest son tells us his memory that he would sit them all on the couch and try to get them to chant. And they hated it, they didn't want to do it. And so Prabhupada tried, but at a certain point, it wasn't just the tea, because he'd been living he had his own room, he had his own temple. He'd figured out, just like I figured out living with my mom, how are you living with someone who's not a devotee and not being mean to them and not offending them, but at the same time not also ruining your spiritual life. So he kind of figured that out. So I don't think it was just as simple as the way Satsvarupa Maharaj described it. We joke about it, but I think there's lots of pieces that you can add to that. I think it was a brewing story. Yeah.
There's a lot of self-love.
A lot of self-love? For who? I explained.
He had a lot of self-love for himself.
Prabhupada.
Yes, for him to be authentic, you have to be true to yourself.
True. But I think that what that means for Vaishnavas is that when we surrender our mind and our hearts to the Lord of our heart, and you can call that yourself, the big self, the little self, the super self. There's a jiva self and there's the super self. That when we're true to ourself, it means we're living for God's will. We're actually living in harmony with that self. So yeah, if you want to call that self-love rather than egoic love, I think that's true. Yeah, Prabhupada had love. But more than that, he had this obligation to fulfill the order of his guru. And that's heavy. That's a heavy order. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah. You say something, I'll repeat it.
Mataji, you know the quality of the pure devotee is to be very compassionate.
Yeah.
Through your examples, Vishima, Soma, and also Pujari's son, many of the examples you gave are very apt to understand the whole Gopal was very compassionate.
Yeah. So that's your reflection, is that yeah, a lot of these examples really demonstrate Prabhupada's compassion. And I know devotees who didn't know Prabhupada, sometimes they romanticize that compassion. He was also, as a guru, sometimes very heavy. I mean, no kidding. Especially trying to teach Westerners that, you know, that the bathroom, you know, is, I remember one time in I guess it was Krishna Balaram Temple when they had the guest house, but they didn't have the Gurukul. And he was trying to teach the devotees that when you go to the bathroom, you take a shower or you wash, you know, like, you know, Westerners do this toilet paper thing, and now it's kind of, you know, stuck in ISKCON even, but screaming, yelling in his frustration. There were times when he would just be like going out of his mind, trying to train people who had no culture of cleanliness at all, you know, and at the same time, just like sometimes parents scream at their kids because you're so frustrated, Prabhupada really saw himself as our parent. And after he would yell at us, then he would be like, I guess he would probably go back in his room and think, oh my God, I really was mean. And then, you know, like you do when your kids, you've yelled at your kids and you're like, oh, well, yeah, I didn't really mean, you know, he would actually come back in a very apologetic way. And it reminds me of how Nanda Maharaj would go to Krishna, and he would come with a stick after Krishna would be naughty, and he'd say, okay, well, I'm your father, and it's my duty to chastise you, you know, but I love you anyway, but actually it's my duty to punish you. And I think it was Prabhupada had that mood too. It's just like a parent, you know, you really feel bad, but they drive you so crazy sometimes, kids. And disciples are like that too. They drive you nuts. Yeah, I mean, ask anybody who has disciples. It's not it looks glamorous, but it is not easy. Right? Yeah.
You probably saw a lot of potential in them as well.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, yeah. Yes, and I think this is, what she said was, she thinks Prabhupada saw so much potential in his disciples and how much time they were wasting. And I think that's true of parents as well. They know what their children are capable of, and it's like, come on, straighten up, you're better than that. You know, be the best person you really are. Good point. Yeah. You're welcome. So you're asking, did Prabhupada have any instructions for people who didn't live near the temple? He did, and in fact, he lived like that. He instructed people to make their home a temple. If you can't get to the temple, if you're too far away, then you make yourself a little corner in your house or a little room. And he encouraged us to install Gor Nitai deities because the standard is not so difficult. If you have Radha Krishna deities, you're really going to install them. That's a very high responsibility. But Gor Nitai deities, he said they're very merciful, offer your food and chant kirtan. But yeah, he would just make your home a temple and not just offer your food, but worship, offer arti. If you can, offer Guru Puja also. Try to engage your family. It's not always easy. Not all family members are as equally passionate. And invite people to the home and help them hear about Krishna. Do you live far away? Yeah. I'm sure there's devotees here who can help you set that up. Say loud, I can't hear you. She's asking, is it true that Prabhupada's wife gave away Prabhupada's translations of his big... Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's another reason I suspect he needed to leave home, because if you're doing work and somebody in the home is destroying that work or selling it, they're really not your advocate, you know. Husband and wife and family are meant to be your support system. That's what family's meant to be. And if you have somebody in the home who's not really supporting you and your work is divine work, you need to protect that work. So yeah, that happened. Anything else? Yes. Speak loud and I'll speak for you. What were Prabhupada's last words and what did he communicate before he died? Does anybody know? What? Well, what I remember is that he said, everything moving and everything not moving is Krishna, and to know this is Krishna consciousness. That's what I remember. There's so many stories about the last time Prabhupada. You want to read that if you're interested. Anything else? I think it's getting late, right? Yeah. You're asking how did Bhaktisiddhanta resolve the conflicts between... Resolved conflicts between devotees? Well, he, again, like a father, you had just... Some people think it was really romantic when Prabhupada was on the planet, and they know no problem. That's not true. You met but a bunch of crazy Americans, young people, you know. So they would be running, you'd have, you know, people coming to him, the girls would be fighting in the Brahmachari Ashram, you know, the women be fighting, and then one would come, oh, she said that, and she said that, and he did that, and Prabhupada would go, okay, well, just try to focus on your service. I mean, he just treated us like kids, you know, and we were kids, really immature, and tried to keep us going. And flattering us, you know, and feeding us, and then another person would come and everybody's backbiting. That's what people do when they live together. Everybody's talking about everybody else, and Prabhupada's like, oh my God, this is really... But what do? This is what you have. You have a team of monkeys. What are you going to do? That's all he had. Krishna sent him these people. So what are you going to do? Until you get better people, you got to use what you have. So he was very tolerant. And sometimes he would, he would be heavy with them, but it wouldn't be, he understood that they had a lot to overcome to get beyond the modes of material nature. And he knew the only cure is to keep them chanting and keep them serving. He knew that you can't control it. People are under the conditioned nature. And as long as you're under the modes of nature, you're going to have politics. Prabhupada said it. You got people, you're going to have politics. That's not going away until everybody becomes, even a pure devotee. Look at the gopis. They had politics going on. So he didn't take it seriously. And he used to tell us, even in married life, nobody takes the fighting of married couples seriously, because he says it's like a rain cloud, you know. It's like, okay, so first there's thunder, then there's lightning, then there's rain, you know. Who cares about it? You know, next day they're happy as a clam. Yeah, so it's not a big deal. Okay, I think we probably have to stop. I don't know what you do at 9 o'clock on Saturday night. Is there prasadam or arti? Okay. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Okay.
Disciples of Prabhupada crying when Prabhupada passed away.
What did you say?